I am so pleased to be able to welcome you to the first panel of this wonderful conference. As Bill Maher mentioned, and thank you so much for the gracious introduction, I have the pleasure of, it's an honor to serve on the advisory board of the Institute, and I am TFI. And with that comes a delightful task, which is to look at the proposals that come in on the research that the Institute supports. I'm always very interested in learning about places in the world that I have yet to travel to, let alone know more about scholarly. And so coming here and learning about some of these projects, works in progress, is a special event for me. So I will see how they've progressed from the time when I read smaller blurbs to the presentations today. Our panel today has this morning I should say, has three speakers. Sibel Kusimba from Northern Illinois University, and I'm hoping that, yes, Magdalena Villarreal and Isabel Guerin, is that how you would pronounce your name? Yes, exactly. Very good, are coming up. And then another team, Heather Horst and Aaron Taylor. Each of them will have about 20 minutes. Well, I should say no more than 20 minutes so that we can keep on schedule. And after that, we will have time for questions. So if you would please just jot notes, you can ask the presenters questions at the end, toward the end, after all the presentations. Presenter, just a quick logistic note, I will be sitting here and sort of tell you about how you're doing on time, about 5 minutes before your 20 minutes run out, if you will. Okay, very good. Everyone's ready to go to listen to to the work, to the research findings. And the first one will be by Sibel Kusimba from Northern Illinois University. Families, Groups, and Mobile Money in Kenya. Sibel, please.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm new to the study of mobile money, but this has been one of the most interesting projects I have ever done. So I want to thank, on behalf of my excellent team, I want to thank the Institute for the opportunity to do this research. I'd also like to thank, in addition to the team in the field, Elizabeth Gross, for drawing these social networks that I'm going to show you. How do I move this? Okay. So I'm an anthropologist. Actually, originally, I was studying kinship in the family. Then I began to notice that from 2002, everyone was using their mobile phones to interact with each other. From 2007, people were sending money remittances to their friends and family at a furious pace, and I realized that that was, in fact, a fascinating opportunity to examine this new technology. To what extent are cultural ideas about kinship and the family and about money being changed by this new technology of mobiles and mobile money? Okay. Research locations. We were in Kimilili, in Bungoma town, in Naitiri, in Kitale in western Kenya. This is a mixture of urban and rural areas. We also had a group in Tezo in Kilifi district in the Coast province. And we've also been working with Kenyan immigrants in the United States, examining the issue of international remittances. So I'm going to try to fold that into the talk today, although I'll mostly be focusing on the Kenyan center of what happens with these remittances as well. Okay, as I said, Western Kenya is a very diverse area. According to recent publications, 50% of people here have a mobile phone. My sense is that it's much larger than that. Certainly access is much, much greater than 50%. I suppose it's very, very difficult to really get accurate information on many of these survey questions. About 80% of the people in Western Kenya are subsistence farmers, although there are some very thriving commercial areas, particularly in towns like Kitale, which is a very well-to-do and important commercial center. So there are many different kinds of communities here, and we tried as much as possible to sample all of them. Extended family bonds are very, very important, of course, in East Africa. Traditions of the extended family among peoples of Western Kenya include factors that are still very important today: patrilineal inheritance, patrilineal social identity, polygynous marriage, which is partly valued because it brings bonds with in-laws and it extends the social grouping. So social networking is something that people have been doing here for hundreds of years. Nevertheless, it's a place where there's very rapid social and economic change because of high birth rates and other factors. Those traditional ties to the land are less and less possible for many people. So there's really a desperate need, especially for the youth, to develop new forms of livelihood here. And so there's a huge interest in seeing if mobile money can enable that. All right, so mobile money in Western Kenya. The system began with sending money, remittances, to friends and relatives near and far. There are other means that people use quite commonly in Western Kenya, using the phone as a bank. Some people feel the phone enables their savings. Other people feel it does quite the opposite, which is interesting. I might have time to talk about that. And people also buy and send airtime to people who are close to them quite a bit as well. There are, of course, many other uses for mobile money systems in Kenya, which are some of the most successful in the world, and so there's been quite a bit of development. Business people use it a lot for their contacts and to buy stock and to pay bills. People also link to banking services as well. But I've put all of that in the category of uncommon uses because for most of the people I interviewed who are subsistence farmers, they simply don't really have enough money to make use of those interconnectivities with banks. We found that very few people have a bank account. With international remittances, which is a small part of what I'll be looking at today, it's gotten incredibly easy. Through the partnership with Western Union, you can log on to the Western Union website and send money directly to the phone of a Safaricom subscriber. So it's just gotten incredibly easy, and you can do this from, they say, 43 different countries. It certainly works quite smoothly from the United States. But mostly we're dealing with a system of day-to-day support and remittances amongst kin and relatives is primarily what we're looking at in Western Kenya. Okay, what are some of the reasons for remittances? Why would you send one? Again, it's ethnographically quite complex, but I've tried to sort of talk about some different circumstances under which you might use mobile money transfers. The first might be urgent needs. Now, urgent needs are initiated by the person who wants to receive, and usually this is a crisis kind of situation. Now, it's difficult to ask, and it's also difficult to send. So what I found is that people tend to rely on someone who is the same age as them when they are in a crisis. They will contact a brother or a sister or a close friend or other age mates. People are reluctant to worry or disturb a grown child or their parents when they are in a crisis type of situation. So I'm stranded and I need transport, or so-and-so has been sent home from school because we don't have any fees, that kind of thing. Another broader category might be everyday expenses, or as opposed to urgent needs, anticipated needs. And oftentimes the conversation about these flows will begin months or even years in advance. So, you know, so-and-so has just taken the KCPE and she's passed with such and such marks. You know, by sending that news around the family, they let it be known that, you know, they will be looking for help for school fees for such a child, that kind of thing. So there's a very complex back and forth that goes around in the family when these remittances are actually performed. Another interesting means of remittances are the social payments, especially at funerals, and in the Bungoma region, the coming-of-age ceremonies for young men are still being performed, increasingly less commonly. But with social payments, there's a contribution, let's say, that is made as a funeral. It's a very public event. There is a book that is signed. And there's a lot of discussion going around in Kenyan society today about whether or not a remittance can really substitute for the presence of a person at one of these ceremonies, where the belonging, the inclusion in the social group is so important and is sort of symbolically performed. Here in the United States, Kenyans who are from Western Kenya are often asked to contribute for funerals, and what they will do is send the money to a friend who then converts it to cash and brings it to this very public ceremony and signs the book on their behalf. So there is a loss of social capital, sometimes with the use of mobile money. Which brings me to the other side of mobile money. It's not just for economic purposes, of course. There's a very strong cultural and social importance to mobile money in Kenya, which I think might be part of the reason why it's so popular here. And you can see this with Airtime. Airtime isn't technically mobile money, of course, but it is a form of value that is transmitted amongst people through their mobile phones. And it's a very common kind of transmission, and usually in very small amounts. And people will send a small amount of airtime to a friend to say thank you for something. I taught for a year at Egerton University, and my students told me that to send someone mobile money was a way of making a romantic overture towards someone. And the male students were always complaining that the women students were asking them for airtime. So it's clearly not just about economics, it's about your social network and about building your social capital as well. So every remittance then has that economic aspect to it, but I think even more important is the social and cultural meaning. It's an expression of friendship, it's a performance of kinship. And for people who are in the rural areas in Western Kenya who receive a lot of remittances, it really doesn't matter to them where you are. You could be just a few kilometers down the road in Bungoma town. You could be as far away as Kansas, for example. But if you've sent your remittance, it means that you want to belong, that you want to be included. And that's taken very seriously. So when you talk to people whose children are very far away, they talk about them as if they're right there. So even if you've been in Kansas for more than 10 years, your mother will still say, he's very useful around here, and he takes care of me. I think it's a testament to just how strong these social bonds are in Western Kenya. Okay, I want to talk about a dynamic that I discovered that I thought would be very important. Sometimes mobile money is used for the individual and the private and the personal, and I call that the sort of me performance in the use of mobile money. In other cases, it is used in a collective or a group kind of a setting. So I want to talk about both of these separately. First, the sort of personal or private me use of mobile money. Definitely when you ask people, what do you like about mobile money, both men and women will tell you that it's about empowering them to make individual decisions, private decisions. Women in particular talk about how they are able to save money on their phone, spend money on school fees or on contributions to their savings groups, go to the hair salon, spend money, send money to their mother or send money to their sister without their husband finding out. So it's clearly very important to them. And Professor Maurer has talked about the relationship between gender and the phone and the idea of empowerment of women. What women don't like is that men also have phones, and they're also empowered. One lady told us men should not have phones because men should not have M-Pesa because there are a lot of divorces going on around here because of M-Pesa. Again, it's the social and cultural importance of this technology that really matters to people. And interestingly, men will say the same thing about their phone, that they feel that it empowers them to do things with their money, even sending money to their mother without telling their wife about it. So, International remitters in particular also like the capacity to send money directly to somebody's phone. And they say that they avoid the family politics there. Often their remittances are very large, usually about 10 times larger than a remittance that comes from within Kenya. So there is a lot of family politics that develops there. Often what they'll do is choose one individual. Often it is their mother, who becomes sort of the broker for these remittances. In other words, they'll send money to their mother, and then they'll tell their mother to figure out who really needs it, who needs school fees the most, who needs this money the most, and they'll allow their mother to make their decisions. And in so doing, they're also giving their mother the remittance of giving her the prestige and the authority that comes from being able to control and redistribute this money in the family. So the personal, individual use of mobile money is very much valued. In looking at this question, I began to realize that it was important to map out these flows of money and see how they move around in a family. So part of our interviews was to construct social networks, asking people who they send money to, who they receive from. So when you draw those, you get something that looks like this. To actually look at what I'm saying here. So we started with Atieno. She's a lady from the Luo areas of Kenya, so she's about 3 or 4 hours driving away from her natal area. She lives in Naitiri and she's a trader. So we asked her who she's connected to. So she's married, but she didn't name her husband as someone she's connected to. She named her sister Mary, and the other people in this network are her children and her sister's children. So, of course, we could keep going. These are incomplete networks. But by starting with one individual and seeing the people who are close to them, you get a sense of who the basic units, the most core networks people are reaching out to. Then you can expand these to look at extended families. You generally find a pattern of cliques or very closely interconnected people who are connected by bridges to other cliques or very interconnected people. And something quite interesting about these networks is that that core group very often consists of a group of siblings. They are often connected to their mothers, and through their mothers to their matrilineal kin. Not exclusively, but often. Okay. So for example, in this family, we have, if I have a pointer here or not, maybe I don't, but in the center there, you have a group of siblings, Julia, Juma, Agnes, and Evelyn, and they have 3 brothers, Augustine, Vincent, and Rogers. So in other words, this is a group of 6 siblings, and they're connected to their children, and in some cases to their husbands and wives as well. The group off to the left there is an in-law tie. This is the husband of Julia and the husband's family. So when you connect these 2 ethnographic interviews with the people inside these networks, you also get a richer sense of what is going on. We asked Julia's children about this network, and they all said the same point about matrilineal networks. They said that their mothers and their mothers' sisters and brothers are the ones who really help them with things like school fees. And they said that their father's relatives are not very much in their lives. So these are patterns that we found over and over again. Looking at generation and types of kin, using Juma's family as an example again. People send money to people who are the same generation as them. Again, this suggests that crisis mode. Oh my gosh, okay. And it's interesting because many people think of these remittances as from one generation to the next, but most of them are in fact within the same generation. You also find, again, the emphasis on maternal ties rather than paternal ties, and the fact that in-law ties, including marriage, are not very common. People don't send money to their husbands and wives nearly as much as they send money to their sisters and brothers and their mothers' family. So I think that pattern is quite interesting. And it really does beg an explanation because it's really the opposite of what you would expect based on the anthropological literature in East Africa. Especially in Western Kenya, people are patrilineal. Your social identity comes from your father. When it comes to inheritance and communal claims to important resources, it's usually done through the father's side of the family. And here we have networks of everyday support that are actually flowing through the mother's side of the family. So I think that's very interesting, and it suggests several things that are going on. One might be cultural change, the fragmentation of extended families into female-headed households. But it's also true that women in this part of Kenya have always been quite independent because of the tradition of polygynous marriage. We're also tapping into something, I think, that often flies under the radar in patrilineal societies, and that is what Marjorie Wolf called uterine kinship. And she actually worked in Taiwan, which is not Africa, but it was a patrilineal rural society, and she described how a young bride comes to her husband's family. She doesn't know anyone, and she has to build her own social networks. She makes friends, and most importantly, she has children. And her children are going to be her source of support for the rest of her life. And I think that's what we're tapping into with mobile money in many ways. It's an individual kind of a network, and people are sending money to the people who are closest to them. And those are the people with whom they have close memories of childhood and of growing up. Okay, so matrilineal networks. I have very little time left, so I don't really have time, unfortunately, to talk about some of the other findings that I had, but I did want to mention that the me aspect of mobile money is just one part of it. There's also the us aspect and the way in which mobile money is used by groups, savings groups and ROSCAs. I was surprised at the extent to which this is very much used. Even though this system of mobile money is really meant for person-to-person transfers, but many associations and groups will use it to make monthly contributions, to pay out money each month to people. They also use it for table banking, so for the contributions, some of them will be given out, others will be lent out with interest in terms of table banking. So I think what's going on is that mobile money is very useful to people from that I perspective, but that people also want to use it from the we perspective. They want to be able to use it more effectively in groups and associations. And right now, the technology is really one-to-one. So what came to me as I was thinking about what I had learned this summer is that mobile money should somehow be transformed into a group kind of facility whenever people want it to be. For example, if you're a member of a savings association with 12 other women, what if all 12 women got the same text message that said, so-and-so has made her contribution for the month? Or, something like that I think would be really helpful for people. Because right now the I aspect of this, the me aspect, is very well served by this technology, but there's so many other ways in which people want to form groups, and they could, I think, be very well served by a we kind of mobile money. Okay, so.
Very much, Sibel, for quickly summarizing, that's true. Our next speakers are Magdalena Villarreal from Center for Advanced Research and Postgraduate Studies in Social Anthropology, and Isabelle Guérin, Institute of Research Development, Paris 1 Sorbonne University. And you have your presentation?
Yes. How do I change the slide? How do I change the slide?
Let's see. Should just be pressing to the right button.
I think so, yes.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much as well. I want to thank the organizers and Bill and Jenny for their kindness and their being so helpful to us with this project. I have to say this is the second time I have a project. The first one I studied in southeastern Mexico in Chiapas, and now I am doing work in the west of Mexico and doing a comparison with Isabelle Guérin, and she's working in India. Isabel and I had previously worked in a project where we looked into financial practices in India, Madagascar, and Mexico. But there was so much information, so much, that in the end we left so many stones unturned that we turned to IMTFI to do the comparison between India and Mexico in terms of the generation, storage, and exchange of value. So we are now looking more precisely on the issue of value and how it is socially conceived, transformed, exchanged, and stored. The aims of the project are to compare the processes, as I say, of generation, storage, accumulation, mobilization, and exchange of money and non-monetary valuables. We include the non-monetary ones because we had already realized from the previous project that it was not only money, but it was all different kinds of values that had been transformed, exchanged, including social, material, and symbolic values that come very strongly into the picture. The frameworks of calculation, how people calculate the value that are entailed in a social relationship or in a material object or in a symbolic object, if you want. So what comes into the calculation is very important to us. What is left out of the calculation? What do people consider trivial or what they consider important is often not the same. And especially when we are doing the comparison between India and Mexico in two different cultures, it is so important to see the ways in which different, we will talk a little bit about it in a minute, but how these differences come to the fore. And for us, that has to do with the changing meanings of money and financial practices and the significance that is attributed to them differentially in the different countries and in the different settings. Also the financial instruments that people use for one and the other. There is not a lot of mobile money being used in the two countries. There is a little bit beginning in Mexico, but not necessarily amongst poorest yet. There is, now that I heard the previous presentation, I said, oh my God, there is time, the airtime. That is one thing that they do pass a lot to one and the other. But not so much in terms of sending money to each other yet. Yet there are different instruments that are being used, and a lot of it has to do with keeping things in mind or with writing notes or with a notebook, as we can see in the picture. This is a notebook from an Indian case. Isabel will speak about Tamil Nadu in South India.
I'm going to give you very quickly a few basic features regarding the Indian context. So the project focuses on a very specific part of India, villages from northwest Tamil Nadu, which is a state located in the southwest of India. So people combine agriculture either as small farmers or as landless laborers who work for others. And they combine agriculture and increasingly with non-farm labor, which is an increasing source of income, especially for men who migrate to nearby cities for a couple of days, a couple of weeks, a couple of months, mainly in the construction sector or as manual laborers in markets. Caste, as elsewhere in India, remains a very important feature of economic, social, cultural, religious, political life. It's economically, we still have a very strong segmentation of labor according to caste. Socially, we have very strong caste-based identities and social hierarchy, with important consequences for our topic, because caste remains a very important marker of valuation. It also remains a very important feature of debt. Depending on your caste, you don't borrow from the same source, you don't lend to the same persons. Magdalena will come back to this later, but now I can just say that that is clearly thought as a marker of social hierarchy, where the creditor is above the debtor, which means that people don't borrow to those who are below them, only to equals or to those who are above them. Magdalena will come back to this later. Regarding value, land, housing, livestock, jewels are important source of value, but processes of valuation differ significantly along caste, along class, along gender lines. If we take land, for instance, upper class and upper caste are increasingly leaving agriculture for urban activities and selling. They are increasingly selling land with, as a consequence, significant transfers of land toward middle and low caste, who, by contrast, still want to be farmers and still consider land ownership as a source of social status, even though agriculture is very poorly profitable, especially in dry areas. Housing is also clearly a marker of status, whatever the community, with very important expense to renovate and enlarge houses. It's clearly a source of internal differentiation within social groups, people trying to distinguish themselves from the neighbors through housing. Livestock is also valued, but by contrast with Mexico, is not as a way for accumulation. People hardly own more than a few cows, and a few goats. In a context where a large part of the population is vegetarian, the livestock market is not very active, but cows still have a very strong symbolic and social value. They are used for social and religious rituals. Jewels are also an important source of value, but especially for women, as it is often the only assets that they own. Regarding investments, there are economic and material investment in land and agriculture, sometimes in small businesses, in housing, as I was saying, but investments in social and religious rituals are extremely important, especially marriages, which are very important to gain status at the household level, with people who frequently spend several years of household income in marriages. But also very important investment in festivals, which are an important marker of status more at the community level. Last point I could make is regarding financial practices. Magdalena will come back to this. The fact that people juggle with a large range of financial instruments. One of the specificity of the Indian context is the recent emergence. By recent, I mean over the last 10 years, approximately, of self-help groups, which is a typical form of Indian microfinance. So yes, here we have an example with a picture of women who, together, a group of 15 to 20 women who first rotated money internally and then who are eligible for an external loan from an MFI or from a bank. We stop here?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Isabel. In contrast, we in Mexico, we are in western Mexico, in the kind of central Mexico. Now, this is an irrigation district, so within Mexico, it is not the poorest. And when trying to compare India and Mexico, we have seen that perhaps we will also have to compare with other Mexican regions, because sometimes it doesn't parallel. Here, there is maize, a little bit of maize, which is linked to more traditional agriculture, but a lot of sugarcane, as we can see in the picture, the sugarcane cutters. Sugarcane cutters come from the poorer sectors of the country, from poorer states, from the southeast especially. And that is considered one of the lower categories of workers in the region. And horticulture, you have even Californian enterprises, strawberry and berries and tomatoes coming into the region, and also hiring locally, but hiring a lot of people from poorer states of Mexico. So you have a very differentiated economy in this El Grullo, which is where we are doing the research. Now, cattle as a source of value. Isabel was talking about livestock, and providing status. In Mexico, livestock provides status, but it is also, to a large degree, a store of value. It is increasingly becoming less efficient in terms of store of value because it does not move as rapidly as other ways of storing value. Cattle, it takes more time to sell, and you have to find the right price, and the cattle has to be fat, etc. But still, it is still considered an important store of value. But also, people invest in homes, in land, in the same way as in India, also for status, but also as a form of investment in vehicles, in shops, in musical instruments. There are many small bands that play in the region and also come to the United States, earn money, buy their instruments, and go back and play there or stay here and play for parties. This also tells about the importance of rituals in Mexican society, but it is different from the Indian case. The rituals in Mexico are perhaps not as critical for everyday, at least up to what we have seen now. We're still in the middle of the project, of course, and we are discussing many things, and as soon as we get into them, we can see more and more coming, and we still have to discuss a lot more. But it seems like the rituals do play a slightly different role in Mexico and in India. At least marriage is not as important in Mexico as it is in India. In Mexico, you would have baptisms, which would be very, very important. The 15th birthday parties and some events. But the music is also is always there, so this is why investment in musical instruments is important. Also, remittances from the United States. This is a region that has has had traditionally a lot of people in the United States and sending remittances. Increasingly, this is less so. There are many returnees. Many people have come back to the state because they are deported, or because they did no longer found work. There were many people in the construction industry, and with the crisis, of course, they no longer found jobs in the United States. But lots of people were in agriculture and in the services like Mexican restaurants in California. But this region, we chose this region because of its history in cooperatives and credit associations. There is a 30-year experience in these cooperatives. They have been very important in shaping the region. They have been very important when people still received money from the government bank. It's increasingly more difficult to do so, but when they received money for agriculture with the state bank, people would still resort to the savings cooperative instead of the state. So the savings cooperatives have a very important history, and there are many, and there's different associations. There are also plenty of ROSCAs. People depend on ROSCAs to a large degree, and there are also a few, now with the incursion of people from other parts of the states, the other parts of the country, there is also more microfinancial institutions coming in, so something similar to the self-help groups in India. But still, that is not the most important. The most important is still the savings cooperatives in this region. And now, in terms of the generation of value, this is the picture shows the production of Chile, which is largely for export. It's part of horticulture, and also one of the characteristics of this is that children are employed with Chile and with sugarcane. You could see that they use big machetes to cut the sugarcane. Well, they have children doing that work as well. And it is the parents that do it because they want to earn more money. They take their children to the work. And it's illegal, but they still do it. And it's very difficult for the employers to stop. And they don't care as well. They don't care whether it's children or not, but even if it's illegal. But anyway, now the generation of value, of course, as we've seen, okay, it's in the production, and most of it is agricultural production. But we have different forms of production as well. A lot of cattle raising, goats, it's a little bit of goats, etc. Migration is very important, as I have already mentioned. I'm going to go a little bit more quickly because the time is going, but the financial practices also have to do with the generation of value. Often value is generated in the practice itself, in the transaction itself. People attribute value to something that perhaps did not have that kind of value. And here I am speaking of value not only in monetary terms, but in social and other currencies. This is why I'm saying different kinds of resources and currencies. So people are, in the transactions, people are also involving the social relations and the cultural symbols and the status in the transactions themselves. And so this is part of the generation of value. Also monetarization and financialization, I think we've all heard about it. I won't dwell in it a lot, but increasingly in this region, money is becoming a measure of value. And with financialization, people are investing in finance instead of investing in production and in agricultural production or other more traditional ways of generating money. The storage of value. Gold as saving and social capital, as we are saying, gold in Mexico is not so commonly transacted as it is in India. In Mexico, gold is often used to pawn, take to the pawn shops, etc. But in India, it is a very, very much a source of value, a source of status. And women will wear the gold in a way that they don't wear it in Mexico. In Mexico, they might try to hide it for fear of it being stolen. Maybe we are not as honest as the Indian people, but anyway, it seems like there is a lot more fear of it being stolen in Mexico than in India. Cattle, as I said before, is different as well because cattle is more an investment in Mexico, whereas it is more of symbolic value in India. ROSCAs and chit funds are, chit funds is the same as what they are using in India in the way of a ROSCA. And that is partly a way of people storing value for the short and medium term. I have to say that most people invest in the short and medium term. If they're going to invest in the longer term, they will buy land or they will buy a house or they will have a livestock. But mostly they have money for the short and medium term. Lending, I can lend money to someone as a way of storing the money. If that makes it secure, and I might even receive a little bit of interest in exchange. The credit and savings associations that are very common in Mexico, more than in India, I think, people will save. In India, some people save in banks. That has to do with the financial inclusion policies in India, but they don't use, it's a small percentage. Perhaps it is similar in India and Mexico, but they use it less in Mexico as a way of saving, or at least in this region of Mexico. Value mobilization and debt. It is very important for us to see the way value is mobilized. That is partly one of the main aims of the project, is to see the mobilization, because it's not how much you have, but it's how you can use what you have. It's how you use these resources as a way of status, as a way of getting to where you want to get. So, and there is debt has a lot to do. Looking into debt shows the bare bones of the structures in the mobilization of valuables. So there is protection, debt, there is protection. We call it protection because of the Indian case where when you owe, you are protected in terms of labor. You then have labor. We wouldn't call it protection so much in Mexico, but it also happens that you owe somebody money and then you are expected to work in return. And also there is exploitation, of course, in this process where you owe money and you have to work for it. And also there is a lot of solidarity involved in different kinds of mobilization. Debt as a marker of hierarchies, as Isabel was saying, in India, you cannot borrow from somebody below the category, your caste, for example. In Mexico, you can do so, although it is less common, but it is a sign of privilege. It is a prestige to lend to your patron or to your boss. That is loyalty, and so you can do it. It's not so common because you don't have the money to do it, but you can do it. The processes of valuation are also different. I have to go very, very quickly now. And the social arrangements that take place are also different in one country and the other. And then I have to just say that how debt is signified in terms of how the estimates are made, the predictions and the appraisals are made, is something that is really important. And I don't have time to go more into it. But I also have to say that we are in the middle of it, so we still have a lot to do in terms of comparing the two countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All the presenters fear looking at me because time just goes very fast. These are interesting projects. But in the interest of fairness, we have to keep to the 20-minute limit, and we're doing very well. Our final presentation is on this panel is by Heather Horst, RMIT University, and Aaron Taylor, University of Lisbon, Portugal, on mobiles, migrants, and money, a study of mobility at the Haitian-Dominican Republic border.
Okay, they're actually going to put up our PowerPoint, and we also have a video, but I just wanted to start by really thanking Bill and Jenny and the sort of expanding IM TFI team. This project was actually originally only meant to be a one-year project, and magically it transformed into a 3-year project and has different phases and iterations. So really quite, we're sort of at the culmination of this work now. But it's really been a pleasure to work with Bill and Jenny over the years. So, okay, I think you can play. So before, we wanted to start out our presentation today by, no audio, by actually showing you some sort of video footage from the place where we are working, which is the southernmost border of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. What you're seeing basically here, to give you some context, is the view from the Dominican side. The gate, on the other side of the gate, is the Haitian side. And this is really it's sort of a Friday morning market it was about 7:45, 8 o'clock in the morning. And people are sort of lining up waiting to come into the Dominican Republic to go into the market to sell goods. So I'll just let this play for a few minutes as I start the talk, but we just wanted to give you kind of a flavor of the place where we've been working. So, and then the other reason that we really wanted to show this video is because it's a really poignant reminder of what Doreen Massey many years ago described in terms of places. She argues that places are not so much bounded areas as open and porous networks of social relations. So throughout this project, we viewed the border as a porous space that is created through state formation, materialized through laws, regulations, and social relations, and it's constituted in and through everyday practice. More recently, we've been really building on some of the work by Nicholas Long, who's an anthropologist who studies on the sort of Indonesian-Malaysian border, who's described the relationships that people and other entities have with borders as a process of bordering. So the shift to thinking about bordering acknowledges in Long's words the, quote, effective charge and powerful symbolic weight that our informants' claims about bordering have, and the kinds of border work that they engage in. So throughout this project, we've had 3 quite broad questions. The first is really around to what extent are different populations living in this border region engaged in practices of bordering, and what does this actually look like in practice? And for example, so as Erin will talk about when she comes up at the end, Haitians move actually quite regularly across the border. And move, back and forth between Haiti and the Dominican Republic, but Dominicans actually very rarely cross the border, even though they have the same access as Haitians do to the Dominican Republic. Our second question was really around how and in what ways different infrastructures are shaping the processes and relationships to the border. And finally, our third question was really around the roles of bodies, objects, and commodities and understandings of people's relationships with the border and the processes of what we're calling embordering and disembordering. So let's. Okay. So we're back to PowerPoint. So as I mentioned, this is a 3-year ethnographic study which included a range of methods, including sort of traditional participant observation, interviews, surveys, and a portable kit study. We really sort of employed a material culture studies perspective, and we were also inspired by some of the work on infrastructures, particularly visible and invisible infrastructures, sort of spearheaded by people like Susan Lee Starr, as well as Paul Durish and Genevieve Bell. One of the methods in particular that we found quite fruitful was this portable kit study, which was kind of a combination of design research methods and a study called the Portable Kit Study done by Mimi Ito, Daisuke Okabe, and Ken Anderson, who studied young urban professionals in Tokyo, LA, and London. In our particular, and you can sort of see on this image some of the portable kits and people sort of, some of the portable kits that people had, and in the process you can start to see people engaging with these objects throughout the study. So in our particular study, we focused upon the objects that people carry with them on a regular basis as they move in, across, and often beyond the border region. Many of these objects included things like house keys, IDs, but we also talked a lot about clothing, jewelry, mobile phones, as well as things like motorbikes, which were quite important. So while those were the kind of typical objects, we also had a few surprises emerging. One of the instances of this were the number of people who kept symbolic money in their wallets alongside the currency that actually had exchange value in the region, and those were namely Dominican pesos, Haitian gourds, and US dollars. What was interesting about symbolic money is that they were placed in wallets quite intentionally, but it's not like my wallet where I just, travel and leave a bunch of currencies around and it's quite accidental. People actually put them in their wallet because they're important, and it reminds them of sort of the relationships of the relationships with the people who actually gave the money to the person. So, in fact, often symbolic money was never actually used by the person who owned it, but just sort of sits in the wallet. So that's kind of all I'll say about that now, but it was really quite interesting there. So I'd like to turn now our attention to the first of the 3 key relationships that Aaron and I believe really highlight the processes of embordering and disembordering in this border region. And specifically here I'll be talking about the family household and the mobile phone. So for those of you not familiar with Haitian society, Haitian families are generally recognized as large, complex social institutions that extend beyond the nuclear family. Historically, there was one particular structure that emerged called the laku, which was really a cluster of domestic units of people who lived together in compounds. Lakus really emerged in Haiti in the era of plantation slavery and independence. And it was really sort of a rural phenomenon where people came together, both kin and fictive kin, to work, share food and money, goods, shared care work for children and elderly, and they also shared a religious system. With urbanization and globalization, however, there have been a number of debates about whether lakus actually still exist in Haitian society. A number of people have argued that things have really shifted to a focus on the nuclear family, and this has placed undue burden on heads of household, and particularly women. Others, however, have been arguing that the decline of the laku is overstated, and that in fact the laku remains still an adaptable, persistent social structure throughout Haitian society. Indeed, there's some people who have done some work in Port-au-Prince, in places like Miami, New York, etc., who've really shown that the laku still is a phenomenon in urban areas and globally, but it's really transformed into a sort of unit for making decisions about the household and an extended family. So given this sort of changing context, the mobile phone has been playing a quite key role in this adaptive social institutions. And I should mention here just a little bit of background about the mobile phone in this region. So you saw sort of Ansipites and Pedernales. So Ansipites is in Haiti, Pedernales in Dominican Republic, and there are actually two different telecommunications infrastructures in the two countries. So on the Haitian side, you have a company called, the main company is really Digicel. And then on the Pedernales Dominican Republic side, you have Claro and Orange. And you can actually use, take your mobile from Claro and use it on the Haitian side within about a 1 kilometer region in practice. They claim it's longer or more, but it really was about 1 kilometer. And what's particularly interesting about this is that we found that Dominicans tend to only have about one phone that they use or that they own, and it's a Claro or Orange phone. But Haitians actually purchase phones both for use in the Dominican Republic and Haiti. And if not, okay, perfect. If not multiple phone cards, and at least SIM cards that they share and share mobile phones with other family members. So as one of our Haitian research participants, Elaine, notes, keeping a mobile phone can be quite costly. There's actually very little access to electricity in Ansipites, so it's quite difficult to keep phones charged. There's a need to keep funds on two phones to keep it active so that people can use it in an emergency. And really the dominant reason why people had owned a mobile phone was to stay in touch with family and friends. And there's a very strong, compared to other contexts where I've worked, like Jamaica, most of the calls are to family. It's a very small sort of calling list, et cetera. Last 2 out of 3 calls tended to be from family members or quite close friends. So it's quite important here. There's also a need to actually coordinate and plan your phone calls with the schedule of the border opening and closing. So the borders typically open from 8 in the morning until 5 at night, and you can't really get stuck on the other side. So if you live in the Dominican Republic, but you go over to Haiti to use your phone, if you don't cross back into the Dominican Republic, you're stuck there overnight. So there's a lot of sort of logistic details to sort of keep in mind. So effectively, the choice of doing things like charging a phone, keeping phone credit, adding minutes, and even lending a phone to a family member is often an indication of the importance of the object in enlivening these social relationships. So throughout our study, we found that the mobile phone is a central object in the maintenance of the laku among Haitians living in this region. It represents a process of disembordering through its work in disrupting the separation of the family and household created by the sort of border movement and mobility. The mobile phone effectively enables social support, forms of exchange and cooperation, and facilitates a sense of care and belonging. And for many, the mobile phone could be seen as the modern-day laku, perhaps the one place where families do come together and relationships can be enlivened. So with that, I will turn the podium over to Erin.
Thank you, Heather, and hi, everybody. So I'm going to build upon what Heather's been talking about with the mobile phone being a kind of temporary laku, facilitating household relationships, family relationships, by talking about how work and state relationships are also constituted through objects. And certain possessions, more so than others, tend to facilitate the mediation of these relationships, especially across the border and within those relationships. So looking at the relationships not just as citizen to citizen, but citizen to state and employers to employees and so on and so forth. And what I want to say is that while this is arguably true of anywhere in the world that these processes occur, on the border they have certain kinds of effects because of the way in which those objects are used to facilitate those border crossings and also the construction of those relationships across different kinds of borders. So the first thing to note, though, is when we talk about the state, here we of course have to talk about two states. We have the Haitian state and we have the Dominican state, and they both have their effects on how people need to negotiate them to arrange those relationships across borders. First, one important thing to note is with the Haitian state, in the town of Ansipites, the state actually in many ways is quite quite absent. It's a very remote place, and people aren't that institutionalised. So one of the main points of encounter is often actually on the border itself, although the Haitian authorities don't tend to have as much effect on the ability of Haitians to cross as, of course, the Dominican state does. And while the town of Pedernales on the Dominican side very much depends upon Haitians crossing for labour and commerce, there is a problem in a sense, which is a very long-standing problem of relations between the two sides. So going back many, many years, there's been not only a history of labour migration, but also a very long history of contention between the two states. And you'll get many problems on the border, and sometimes the border also gets closed down, which actually happened in 2010 after the Haitian earthquake, when there was a cholera scare. So there were a couple of weeks where the Dominican state wasn't letting anybody cross, and the Haitians were sort of saying, well, I said to a friend of ours, well, what did you do during that time? How did you work? And he said, we just did nothing. We sat around. What are we going to do? We can't feasibly cross the border. So even though there are ways across, you can literally sort of walk around the fence and cross. If it's being policed, then it can be a risky situation or an expensive situation if you need to pay bribes. But what I want to say, though, very much so, is even though this border can be a very fixed line, most of the time it's actually porous, as Heather was saying, and what you end up getting is a situation where the border isn't just the legal border. That's actually often the easiest line to cross. The other lines come when you start to move out away from the border zone and towards Santo Domingo, further into the Dominican Republic, because what happens is that, say you get on a bus to go to Santo Domingo, your bus will always be stopped by the military at numerous checkpoints along the way, sometimes up to 14 checkpoints between Pedernales and Santo Domingo. And so every time your bus gets stopped, you have to go through a certain process, which I'll explain in a second. So that's the movement of the border around. So because we have this porosity of the border and sort of it seems to be staged, we started thinking about the border as more like a living fence. And this is a term that we borrowed from the anthropologist Sidney Mintz, who worked in Haiti back in the 50s and 60s. And in 1962, he published an article where he described this living fence. And what it actually is a fence that's made of sticks that you cut off and you plant in the ground around where you want to demarcate around your house, and the sticks grow into bushes, so you literally have this living fence. But it is a nice metaphor for the ways in which relationships are constructed across the border, because it's all these different kind of parts that sort of make this whole, and it is alive in the sense that it's constituted by the people and the objects they use to create that social network, if you like, across the border. So what happens when you encounter the state, which is part of that living fence? Well, we kind of notice that there are three main material forms that come into play. There are more than that, of course, but the three primary ones. And the very basic one, you might think it's documentation such as passport and visas, but while that is there, money actually trumps it. Money is the most important thing you can have with which to encounter the state. So why is this? Well, without documentation, you can still travel from Haiti to Santo Domingo. It's just that on your way, you need to pay have the money to pay a series of bribes in order to make the passage happen. So you need to pay the military checkpoints along the way, the requisite bribe, and it can cost up to 5,000 pesos, which is around, I think about $200 more or less, to get to Santo Domingo, so it can be quite hefty. What is interesting, though, is that even for Dominicans, money can also be a basic factor in encountering the state while travelling or in other situations. So we knew a young man who was Dominican, and he travelled from Pedernales to a town near Santo Domingo, and he forgot his ID card. So he still had to pay bribes, but of a lesser amount, to the military guards along the way. So money just keeps recurring for both nationalities, but at different kind of levels and with different sums attached to them and different levels of risk. So the second thing, of course, is documentation. And if you have your passport, your Haitian passport, and you have your Dominican visa in it, then your travel is greatly facilitated. There's far less chance of you meeting with a military officer who decides that you should go home again. And the bribes still exist, but they tend to be far cheaper. What actually happens here is that if you have your visa, you should not, by rights, be paying any bribes to anybody. But nevertheless, when you get pulled over by a military checkpoint, all the Haitians get taken out of the bus and taken aside to pay these bribes. And there are people who do no longer pay these because they know the system and they can work around it. But there are people who continue to pay the bribes, maybe because they're not familiar with the process, this is their first time travelling, or they don't quite have the confidence to stand up for themselves and say, hey, I know my rights, I know this is wrong. So there are also people who will simply just avoid this system altogether. We have another friend who, even with or without a visa, he will never take the bus, he'll take a private car in order to get around the system. And another one is the body. So people can use their bodies in a way that helps them evade that. So they will dress respectably so that they actually don't get pulled over. So the next area I want to discuss briefly is work and livelihood and how objects are used to negotiate that. Two forms of employment we could say are important here. One is being employed by a Dominican, I'm still talking about Haitian employment, and another one is being self-employed, and these have their own objects attached to them as well. So one domestic servant that we talked to who is paid about $100 a month, she has a kind of a patron-client relationship in which her boss will not pay her much money, but she will give her things constantly. And this woman's been incorporated into the household, kind of like a daughter in many ways. So her boss gave her a mobile phone. And this was a very interesting case because while there were a number of people we talked to who gained their mobile phones through their employment, this person retained her phone for use pretty much only with her employer. So she would use it to stay in touch, to know when she had to go to work and so on. And she didn't really use that phone to facilitate further social relationships. So she didn't have many numbers in there, she didn't really call anybody, she didn't really receive calls. And this was actually a very unusual case. And she was also criticised by her neighbours for working for a Dominican, and they would say to her, oh, you just do that because you don't know how to market, you don't know how to sell things in the border market, so that's all you can do, you have to be subservient. In the market itself, people have a great deal more liberty into how they operate and incorporate a huge amount of objects into their repertoires and their relationships with people, and very much can continue those more traditional, practical kind of relationships. And here we have a money changer on the right-hand side and a tomato seller on the left. And just briefly, we have a friend of ours who currently, he works with the people who sell in the market, so he will ferry people around, ferry clients and goods from home to market, and he also pays his cousin's Sky bill. So his cousin lives 80 kilometres away deep in Haiti, but has a Dominican cable television account and will send the money back via mobile money, which our friend will pick up from the local microcredit institution and pay that. So just to very briefly conclude, what we're seeing here is a kind of a cross-border arbitrage where people will use things from one side or the other to make this livelihood happen. And I want to briefly address the idea of power and privilege. So what we think we're seeing is that unlike other previous studies that have been done in Dominican and Haitian relations, it's very hard to reduce what's happening to either class privilege or race or just a general political economy. Rather, all these things happen in a broader material and cultural context, which is really about the relationships that happen in that border space. So the fundamental aspect that produces this relationship, this environment of relationships, is in fact the border itself. But not just the border as that line, but rather as that living fence that is constituted by people and objects simultaneously. Thank you for your patience. Thank you very much.
Very good. I think without further ado, we should let you raise some questions. If you hold up your hand, I'll try to note where you are, and I'll see who goes first, and if we should probably stick to relatively short questions to individuals, and then once our time comes more toward 10:30, if there's still questions, we'll group them, and then the presenters can respond in that way. Yes, go ahead. Maybe say your name too and speak as loud as possible.
My name is
Oh.
I'd like to address this question to the second one, to the
Please, would you wait for the microphone? Okay, go ahead now.
I'm Mani Nandi from University of Delhi. My question is addressed to Magdalena and our co-researcher. It's an interesting study between Mexico and India. But there are one or two points of clarity I'd seek from you. One is the area of study in Tamil Nadu, which is it's a full big state. What is a district in Tamil Nadu which has been focused upon? The second issue is when you talk about investments in rituals or expenses in rituals. There needs to be a clarity between the two, because when you're talking about investments in or asset ownership is a social symbol. But when you talk about expenses and rituals in India, life cycle needs like marriage, births and festivals are the expenses for which you save for the future. Thank you.
Would you take that up? What's it?
Yeah.
Quickly, if you can.
The district, yes, Vilupuram and Kudalo district in northwest of Tamil Nadu. Yeah. And regarding, I think this would deserve a long comment, the distinction between expense and investment. I was talking about marriages and festivals as investment in the sense that people are really expecting some return from it. Yeah.
You had a question here in the front row? Okay,
We just have a question for Magdalena and your team about migration in Mexico. Can you tell us a little bit more about what are the underlying causes of migration and how you guys have kind of focused on that? The angle that you have used to approach that part of it. Just okay. Thanks.
Yes, thank you for the question. I would have to talk about two different kinds of migration. First is the migration to the United States, which was perhaps one of the longest tradition. In this region, as in many regions in Mexico, agriculture was no longer providing enough sustenance. And people started migrating when they had big events like a funeral, like a sickness in the family, when they needed large lumps of money. But they also migrated because the cousin migrated, because the family, because there was this tradition of saying those that went to the United States come back rich, and I want to be rich, this kind of thing. But there was also a lot of internal migration from other villages to this region, because it was when it became an irrigation district, then people came to work in as day laborers. And now the migration that is most important is the one that from other states of Mexico, workers who come to labor in the sugarcane, in the tomato companies, and in the other. So it's more a labor migration. And the performance is very similar to that coming to the United States. They buy a lot of televisions and radios and the electronics and things and take back home. So there is a big commercial industry also thriving in the region. So they do, and they send remittances, and they also save. They're beginning to save, and they have ways of saving that have to do with the patrons. In the sugarcane, for example, they already discount some money as a way of saving so that they can take home in the end. Well, this is what they say. They also make business from it, but still to take back home when the season ends.
This goes to, my name is Luisa Krehel, and my question goes to the panel. I'd like to see what considerations you have made in your studies to really see the change of the cultures, how the cultures change, their values, what are the ethical implications of technology, and how the dynamics, now that they are connected, then you have all kinds of situations where security is a factor, and also the priorities of the expenditure of the family, such as first is the phone and then is the food. So what have you seen and what have you learned about this process of integrating technology in society in these poor communities? Thank you.
Maybe Sybil can start and you two can confer.
Well, I think it certainly raises a very important point. I think there are trade-offs involved in the adoption of this technology. And I guess the question's very general, but I can think of many things that come to mind. The conflict in marriages regarding this very personal and private form of using money. Collected a lot of information on that. The fact that many people at the lowest, not to use that negative word, but people with very little income often spend a lot of money on airtime and phone cards and so on. And I think people are really beginning to push back against mobile money in Western Kenya. They are beginning to feel very, very pressed by constant demands from relatives. So we talk to people who have thrown their phones away. Some of you are familiar with some of the creative things that Kenyans do with their phones. They have 2 phones, they have 4 SIM cards, and it's all an effort to try to gain some kind of control over, these connections and these networks. So many people describe this as more of a curse than a blessing. Someone told us. So people are definitely beginning to push back against it.
We finally worked out our answer. So what's interesting about this case, we weren't really looking at sort of changes in values and culture there, but I think, there's sort of 2 things. One, I think we didn't really see the sort of rampant, sort of spending and sort of bling and sort of changing out phones and things like that we've seen in other contexts, even between Haitians and Dominicans in this region. Dominicans were much more likely to be sort of changing out phones and keeping up and really sort of taking on additional expenses, whereas the Haitian migrants were really quite cautious and really put on a very minimal. They were, constantly aware of savings plans and phones plans. They're sort of economizing and sharing a lot of sort of mobile phone and SIM card sharing with people. People would leave they would go drop off their phone at a place to have it charged with someone. Other people would use it. It was actually hard to get in touch with people at times because they had left their phone with someone to charge it and take care of it. And there's certainly, it's not the sort of rampant, what's interesting is compared to my previous work in Jamaica, where it really was, sort of everyone was getting phones, they were using them, they were extending networks, really sort of doing it. The Haitians were actually quite conservative, and it really was about family and maintaining those connections. So I think we sort of think that, at least among Haitians, that there's a strong case to be made for continuity rather than transformation.
Are those phones being sold to them, or how they finance the telephones? These people, do they buy it?
The most common phones people buy are the cheapest variety, which costs about $10, and most people will save up the money, or they will borrow money often from friends and neighbours, or they'll be given it as a gift or lent a phone by employers till they get another one. But you do also get people who will make a business out of it, so they'll buy a phone and they'll sell it at a profit because they'll travel from one city to another, and then they'll go buy another couple of phones, and they'll use one of the phones they're about to sell until they've sold it, and they'll just keep their SIM card and they'll go and get more. So there's also that aspect as well.
Hi, I'm Melissa Cliver. I just have a quick question about the kits that you guys were using, and I wonder if you could just talk about that for a minute, about how effective you think it was, or a little bit of detail about how you put it together, and a little bit more about that.
I'll start and then you can add. Basically we didn't do the portable kit study till the very end of the project. So, and Erin has done sort of the bulk of the field work there. And so it was, we tended to approach people who she had developed relationships with over the course of really about 2 years. That we had, that had been interviewed, or, she was sort of interacting with. Basically what we did was we asked people to sort of, we set it up so that they would, kind of bring their bag or whatever they would normally carry with them. So we did kind of a sort of a reenactment, really, than a sort of catch them on the street and see what was in their bag. You know, so they were a bit prepared for the thing. I mean, there are a couple of things that were interesting about the portable kit study. I mean, I in particular really wanted to do it in their homes and to sort of see it in the broader sort of context of things. But I think one of the pictures was of this sort of wash basin, and that was actually the only flat surface that we could find to actually do the portable kit study on. So we eventually started doing it in homes, in people's homes, on their floors, and you know, wherever we could find it. But we also started doing it at the place where we were staying, just because it was often cooler, air conditioning. You know, they had some privacy, et cetera. So there were I think a number of things there. But I mean, it was just really interesting. We asked them basically to sort of pull out everything and to sort of discuss, to group it into things that they tend to carry with them every day and would, you know, absolutely essentially carry versus things that they carry less often. And then we had them sort of rank them in order of priority. And so there's this process of sorting and shifting around. And I mean, just really fascinating things. You know, the symbolic money. One woman had breast cancer pamphlet that she had been treated for that and was carrying around with her. And I think one thing that Erin was really pointing out is that people really felt like the safest place to keep things was actually with them on their bodies. I think, do you have anything to add?
Just simply in comparison with a more standard style interview, I actually found them quite a lot easier than I had in the past, just doing normal interviews with no props. Because people could then talk about the objects, and a lot of them were related to their families. So you just get to find out such a wealth of information about people in context. It's just amazing. I think I would probably just about always do these in future and use some sort of prop, if not the studies, then people's homes themselves.
Okay.
First, I just want to say I really found interesting all of the panel's presentation. As an economist, I really appreciate these detailed accounts of what's happening. And a specific question to the Mexican case, to Margarita, is as the livelihoods of people change, what happens in the context of narcotics policies going on and the wars going on? I know Natalia Mendoza, for example, an anthropologist that studies this, the change in producing any kinds of seed, maize, to producing marijuana, that changes the everyday, the livelihoods of the people. And I'm sure the mobile use also has an impact.
Yes, this is not one of the most drug-producing or commercializing regions in Mexico, but there are drugs. There are drugs, especially in the areas in the mountainous areas, and people will talk about it. And the way the livelihoods change is that there is more money circulating, because they buy cars, because they pay for music, because they buy beer and drinks, etc., that drug traffickers do. So in that way, the livelihoods change. They also have changed because there is more fear. There have been some kidnappings going on, and that is not precisely the drug people, but it is the violence that surrounds it that allows for kidnappings. And there has been a lot of fear in that sense in this region. And that also makes people much more cautious in terms of what they do and how they go about doing their everyday things. And also the kinds of show of money or wealth that they are willing to do. I mean, people will try not to show wealth so that they are not object to kidnapping and to these kinds of things. So that is also very important in terms of the fear that is felt. And as I say again, this is not one of the regions where violence is most evident, but there is some, and it has had some impact as well.
Why don't we collect a few questions, and each of the presenters then has a minute or so to provide whatever remarks they would still like in response to questions or what they couldn't have, didn't have time to say but would like to. Okay. So there was a question right there, and then on this side, I'm sorry not to be neglecting you, but the microphone is traveling in specific ways. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Ivan Small from IMTFI. I had a question for Sybil. You mentioned 3 categories of remittance use, urgent need, everyday expenses, and social payments. And I was wondering if you also see these as request categories, and if so, how they actually map onto actual spending. Because it seems to me that these are kind of at the level of household spending, and it's somewhere between the I and the we, kind of categories that you were mentioning. So in that case, how is it that people would spend in an extreme I case, for example, pleasure consumption, or in a we case where people want to spend money for savings groups? Can remittances be directed to these, but through these kind of household request categories?
Did you had a question? No? Yes? Just down. Right there.
Hi, I'm Deepti from Center for Microfinance. My question is also for Sybil. I think your study is quite interesting, especially, at least I was not aware of, the sharing of airtime. This is not so common in India. But I was quite surprised when you said, like, many people now taking it as liability, because I think there's a whole really big scope for e-transaction. So I also want to know, when you're doing this research, did you come across something where people is using this, airtime, sharing of airtime, or uses of airtime for business transaction, or giving it as credit, something like that?
Other questions? No, great.
I have a question.
Very good. Go
I have a question for Erin and Heather. Concerning the currencies that people use, do they use currencies indistinctly in one country and the other, or how does it happen if they're on the border?
Great question. Okay, this is one of my favorites. So,
maybe you can just go ahead. If there are no more questions, you answer that, and then we'll give Sybil a chance to.
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in there. Well, basically, on the border itself in these two towns, the Dominican side uses Dominican pesos virtually exclusively, apart from the market at which is right on the border where both will be exchanged. Within Untitled, both currencies circulate, so Haitian goods and Dominican pesos. However, what is really interesting is that Haitians throughout Haiti generally do not count in Haitian good, they count in Haitian dollar, which is a fictional currency which is at a rate of 5 to 1. And the reason why it exists is because the Haitian good used to be tied to the US dollar at that rate. And so today, even if you're counting, say you have 100 good, you will say you have $20, even though it no longer exists. And that is also, so what you actually have is in Untitled in the market, you have Haitian good, you have Dominican peso, you have Haitian dollar, and you have US dollar all used together.
And the Haitian customs takes US dollars only.
Sybil?
Yes. Well, thank you for that question. And I think you're very right. Maybe these could be more specifically thought of as request categories. And sometimes the money that is sent is used for something else other than what people asked for, of course. And for some people, this is of great concern, and for other people, not of great concern. And my theory about the mothers is that many people, once they've given to their mother, they will allow their mother to make all of the decisions about how it's actually used. And someone said to me, I already gave it to my mom, and I don't care what she does with it, and she's going to sort it out. For others, particularly when they are giving to a brother or sister, there is that concern that they will not use it for what they've we're supposed to use it for. And this, I think the farther away people are, the more remittance comes to stand in for the relationship and for the presence of the missing person, and the more charged it becomes. Definitely. So what I found with international remittances is that people always ask for school fees because they feel that somehow that is acceptable, a kind of, human investment request to make of someone who's in America and who's probably very westernized. But once they get the money, they will do all kinds of things with it. I mean, no one would ever ask for a contribution to a circumcision ceremony, but in fact they would use the money for those kinds of traditional things. And so, yes, you're very right that kind of elision of the categories happens all the time. Yeah, if I understood your question correctly. And then with the sharing of airtime, and yes, you find that people will give each other airtime in lieu of mobile money, and I guess that's how mobile money actually started, was that people were using airtime originally. So I've found that happens, but not often. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Ladies, would you like to answer this question you didn't have a chance to about cultural change and ethical implications? Or whatever you'd like to say, so you also get a turn.
Maybe just say one word about the comparison, because it might seem very strange comparison is very exciting but very difficult. So we can ask us, nobody asked the question, but I was expecting this question. What does it make sense to compare these two regions, which are very different on many aspects? So first we're talking about regions. I'm not talking about India. As our Indian colleague was rightly pointing out, India is extremely diverse. Tamil Nadu is extremely diverse. So what I've said is valid only for the few villages I've been working with. Magdalena has been talking about a particular region in Jalisco, El Grullo. For me, and I suspect for us, and this also make the link with the title of the session, we're not comparing objects, we're comparing processes. And for us, looking at money and finance is an excellent way to look at social dynamics. And we believe that money and finance are an excellent entry point to look at social relationships, political relationships, and it is in that way that the comparisons, I hope, make sense. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much. On that note, I would like to thank all the panelists and the audience for starting us off in a really exciting fashion. So this is only the start, and the rest is to follow. Thank you very much.